Hey, and welcome back to the Contemplative Science podcast. My name is Jamie, and as always, I'm joined by co host Dr. Mark Miller. Mark, how are you, man?
Hey, Jamie, how's it going? As always, extremely excited to be here. The guests over the last few weeks have been amazing, and our guest today is one of my very favorite researchers. So I'm stoked.
Yeah, so today our guest is Antoine Lutz. Antoine is a philosopher and neuroscientist. He is currently the director of research at INSERM, and above all, he's one of the world's foremost pioneers of neuroscientific research on contemplative practices. Antoine, hey mate, thanks for being here.
Hi, Jamie. Hi, Mark. Thanks for the inviting me.
Yes, of course.
Antoine, I want to jump straight in. So, central to your research is understanding how the brain, somewhat unnecessarily, might contribute to our suffering by experiencing things as more real than they actually are. How how come? How so?
Yeah. So one of the theme of my work is on if you want how we subjectively perceive things as real. So it's sometimes called a subjective uh, realism. So it's the process of, for instance, perceiving a very simple one is perceiving thought as being real. You know, in depression, there are evidence that that's if you identify with a say depressive thoughts of I'm I'm not worthy, or you start to have this kind of mental imagery, the thoughts appear to your mind as being solid and real, and so that's really the a very intriguing question for me is how do you how can you regulate this sense of solidity and rigidity, or what we call reification, so making things real, and yeah.
Does real mean actually true or actually happening? What do you mean by real?
So real in the sense that as I said, if you take the example of a thought, a thought in a way is real in the sense that if you have a depressive thought, so no, that would lead someone to, for instance, to jump from a cliff. So in that sense, it has a direct meaning, but it's also just a thought, meaning it's just a mental product, and as such, it may not be as solid as real as we think. So that's really that's central theme of constructing a certain appearance in your mind and being able then to letting go or deconstruct or de-reify your thoughts. And so that's really something that's interests me.
So I know that there was a study relatively recently that I found really interesting, and I think it sits side by side with this idea. They took people who were suffering from major depression, and then they asked them, "How much are you depressed?" And they say, "Wow, I'm really depressed. I wake up depressed. I'm depressed all day. I go to sleep depressed." And that was really their experience. That was their real world experience. So they gave them a beeper, and then they beeped them randomly throughout the day over a number of months. And then they asked them to write down what were you thinking and what were you feeling. And it turned out that they were really only having sort of depressive thoughts and depressive feelings, a very small fraction of the day, 10 or 15% of the day. And the rest of the time, it was either neutral or positive. Nevertheless, they really did have a real feeling of being depressed, as if they got stuck in the idea of being depressed.
Yeah. So the that's a very good point. And in the field of depression, there is some pioneer work from the group of Zindel Ziegel, for instance, in Toronto, and they're using a construct in psychology that is very close to the notion of de-reification, which I just described. It's this notion of cognitive diffusion, is how much you can, instead of fusing and being one with a thought, you can diffuse it, meaning creating some cognitive distance with the thoughts in such a way that it's appeared just as a thought. And what they found in a study a couple of years ago is that when they look at the impact uh, of of a mindfulness intervention on depression relapse, so they already found that mindfulness can have this cultivate this capacity to diffuse uh, diffuse thoughts, the capacity to monitor thoughts and understand the nature of thoughts. And what they found in this particular study that the best predictor for preventing someone to relapse into depression was to develop or train this capacity to cognitively diffuse thoughts. So it seems to me a central capacity that is cultivated in meditation, and there are clinical evidence that is also meaningful in the case of depression and prevention of depression.
Because to break that out, depression is a depressive thought, and then we buy that. We think that's real. So if
Exactly.
you can
Yeah.
create distance and say, well, it's just a thought, it's the product of some processes, but it's not me, it's not real, that actually stops us being depressed.
Yeah, I mean exactly, and so in a model we developed a phenomenological model of mindfulness that we proposed a couple of years ago. We identify a couple of specific dimension, and I think two of them were central. Actually, three of them were central. One is to learning to orient your attention and control where you put your mind. Another one is being aware of where is your mind, so it's kind of meta awareness. And the third one is this capacity to de-reify.
Mm.
And the notion in psychology of cognitive diffusion is somehow a combination of this capacity to monitor the mind and the capacity to de-reify. And that's so cognitive diffusion is probably this capacity to monitor and diffuse.
You know, I'm just thinking out loud here. Like, I think everyone's had the experience of they've had a boyfriend or girlfriend,
All right.
and then you break up, and then you find out, you hear from somebody that they're with someone else, and you have this image in your mind's eye of them together, and it physically hurts. You go, like, you can feel it manifest physiologically. Is that an example of the mind going, this thought is really
Yeah.
happening? The image is
Yeah,
real,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
playing
That's a
out.
great,
Yeah.
great
Wow.
example. Yeah, in contempt, that's exactly the point that you are creating a certain perception of something that is not real, not there, and that is appears so real that you have a physiological response of a change in your heartbeat. You can sweat, you can have a bodily sensation of anger, and so that's really a very good example about the power of the mind. And I think that that's one of the central capacity that is trained in meditation. I think in mindfulness meditation.
The brain is extremely literal. Is that an evolutionary thing?
Well, that's a great point. I mean, why are we like that? And
Mm,
I think it's one proposal is that the reason things appear as real is that it's useful,
mm,
and the reason it's useful is that you have to be you have to guide uh, action. So one of the primary goal of the brain is to inform the organism about the world and to be able to him to engage and manipulate and control the environment. And so making things real and solid is really very useful to be able to act. And so if you take the example of the retina, when you move your eyes, if you look at really what's happening on your eyes, it's just an ongoing change of sensory stimulation. But phenomenologically, what it's appear is that when I move my head, it means as if the world remain stable and real, when actually it's not what's happening in my eyes. And that's really one of the most amazing outcome of our brain is to build that solid reality outside.
So evolutionarily, I get that. So, like, if you imagine eating, and then you have a really very real response in your body as if there was food, that's one way that you can get an organism to start moving towards getting food, isn't it? So you can have a thought pop up when your blood sugar levels are starting to drop, and then the physiological response that you have in relationship to the thought about food actually gets you going. And you've done some research there as well, haven't you, on some of the gustatory effects that we have when we imagine food or see an image of food, and some of the relationships with meditation. Is that right?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
you can see uh, that idea of reification you could see as a from a contemplative viewpoint. It's I think probably very related to the some of the fundamental notion of poison of the mind in say contemplative practice. You know, you can have poison of craving, or poison of avoidance, or poison of ignorance, and and that capacity to make things appear as real is fueling many of this type of destructive emotions. And so to
Mm.
take the example of food, indeed what we did is that we, with the PhD students like Constanza Baquedano, who is now back in Chile, we look at we try to replicate the work from the group of um, um, Papiers and Barcelou, and they develop a clever paradigms that try to look at food images and ask a person to relate to the food image as if they were real.
Right.
So for instance, it's something when I teach meditation in class, and sometimes I love to. It's amazing. You just give an example of a food image. You can take whatever you want, like a strawberry, a nice donut, and then you ask the person to just to look at it and act as if it's to immerse into the image, as if it's real, and as if they're about to eat the strawberry or to eat the donuts. And what is amazing is that you ask them, the participant, how many of you are just salivate?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you get
This
the
must happen.
most,
This must happen 100 times a day in our culture. You
yeah,
know, you see signs all the time.
exactly. And it's amazing because, and then you explain, well, there is, of course, everyone know that there is no strawberry on the screen.
Yes,
Yes,
exactly.
you still salivate. So there is a salivation reflex, which is preparing the intake of food. So it means that you somehow we are tricked all the time by some of our internal models that are helping us, but are also tricking us. And the so one of the contribution of Constanza work is that so first we replicate the Papers and Barcelo's finding that when you train someone to get immersed into the food versus being aware of it in a mindful way,
Yes.
it is changing your behavior. So when you give them a task of what's called an approach and avoidance task, when we somehow in a nutshell, you're measuring how much um, your brain is biased by the food images. So it's a task that's um, essentially you see again the same images of food, but when you need either to press toward you or away from you a joystick, and then the food image is going to go approach or go in the background, and so that's create almost a feeling of approach and avoidance. And what is great is that when you need to when there is your favorite food, and you have to press to avoid it, you can see that it's created a much slightly longer response reaction time because there is a conflict between your impulse to eat it and the instruction to get away from it. And so by looking at that differences between a condition when you go towards you desire or against it, you can measure the impact on you on of your mental representation on the task. And what could and so what we found is that there is and what we replicate is that there is the more you immerse into the certain images and make it real, the more there will be a bias in this approach avoidance task compared to a mindfulness condition.
Wow.
Uh, Yeah, and what was interesting is that so Constanta had the idea to also measure the salivation of the participant before and after, and what we found is that there was you salivate more during the immersed condition than the mindful condition,
Yeah, of course.
and what is yeah, but also what was interesting is that people report that on different phenomenological scale that they were more like the food were more sticky, they appear more real, they're more the mind is more absorbed. So we can measure all these first person quality associated to the task, and we can find that the more you were actually absorbed by it, or uh, the food was sticky, there was a sense of craving, the more you have salivation, and the more you have salivation, the more there was after this manipulation a food bias. And for me, it's fundamental because you can really demonstrate that the way you relate in perception to object is going to create mental habits that then guide your behavior in the next moment.
Yes, exactly.
And so it has, I think, a lot of clinical implication and help us to maybe, I think for me, it's give us an interesting insight about, I mean, how mindfulness could impact habits formation by, in that particular case, by regulating craving. So
Are we seeing anything in the brain related to this sort of reification and de-reification? Are we seeing anything in particular going on in the brain that tracks to making something feel real, subjectively real, and orienting towards our perception in a way that's, you know, diffused and a little bit subjectively unreal? Is it, do we have any markers in the brain for this sort of thing?
so what we've done in this particular study was to also measure electroencephalography, so EEG. So the participant did this task while having this EEG cap on it. And so what we found is that there was indeed a correlation between different brain evoked potential. So the, 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 the brain response to the food stimuli. And so such as that when you compute a marker, an EEG marker for the comparable to the food approach and avoidance behavior, we found it was related to an ERP marker called N2, which is a marker of response inhibition. So the more so by looking at this marker, you could predict this this food bias. And then we observed two interesting findings, and one of them is that when you are when you are trained in being more mindful, so we see less of this food bias, and that's correlated by to a stronger response in in a brain marker of early attention, something called a N1, N100. So the potential that arrives really at the very beginning, around 100 milliseconds when you perceive the food image, and that's a marker of early selective attention. And so what's possible that you are more capable to engage attention to regulate that impulse when you were trained to cultivate that mindful stance. So that's one observation we made. Um, so that helps us to understand now what's when mindfulness might be impacting this type of craving behavior. Uh, Another interesting finding was that we compare novice and more experienced meditation practitioners, and so for compared to novices, what we found that there was that the novices when they were um, when we compare a late response in the brain evoke potential around 400 or 500 milliseconds, that's called the late positive potential LPP, and there was less. Um, we found there was less affective reappraisal, so reevaluation of the stimuli in the mindful condition in the practitioner more trained in mindfulness,
Right.
suggesting that they were capable to regulate that conflict much more easily than the novices without having to reinterpret or
Wow.
re-regulate their emotions.
Wow.
Does that apply to pain?
Mm,
People with chronic pain,
great question.
etc.
Well, so exactly. So far we discuss um, regulation of thoughts in
Mm.
depression. I give you an example of how it can impact also craving. So um, in the case of food, and that could be relevant for addiction.
Mm.
And but you're right, it's exactly the same process we think in relation to pain.
Wow.
So pain is another very interesting area of research in our group in Lyon, where we are particularly interested in understanding what's called the second arrow of pain. So, as you know, there is Uh, pain is a multifaceted experience that involves a sensory component, an affective one, a cognitive one, and and um, the the link with the reification or cognitive diffusion is the following. So often there is what is called the first arrow of pain, which is the type of suffering that comes from the immediate um, painful sensation. And then there is a second one that is much more cognitive and come from the fact that you feel, for instance, you're anticipating the pain, or you feel helpless about the pain, or you feel that you feel that the pain will never stop, and you're worried about it. So all this kind of cognitive amplification of the painful experience that make it actually create a second hour of pain.
Yeah, because none of that's the pain, right? That's just our interpretation of the pain, our emotions around the pain. So that's the
Exactly.
second, right? The second. I've heard this analogy in terms of darts. You know, we get a dart of pain and then we take it out and start putting it back in 5 times.
Exactly, and that's the problem. That's you kind of uh, you're creating yourself some pain. But so sometimes it's useful. Huh? It's good to anticipate the pain, and it's good to be able to predict and avoid pain. But sometimes we're so good at predicting things, anticipating things that it's become like an unnecessary source of pain.
See, that's one question I have. So we've talked about how thoughts can be taken more real than they are, and then they can cause problems like craving. And we can use mindfulness and diffusion techniques in order to overcome styles of craving. I mean, we see that already. One of the best programs for getting over smoking today. It
Yeah,
starts by saying, "Don't try to stop smoking." Keep smoking, but be mindful of what smoking
exactly,
really is all about. And actually, that unhooks you. But
exactly. Yeah.
pain is slightly different for me because uh, I get that we can diffuse the concept of pain, but pain has this really old evolutionary story where it's supposed to protect us, right? We feel pain when we're in danger. And so I wonder about mindfulness being this technique to diffuse or unhook from the concept of pain, if that might put us, does that put the animal into further danger? Or is it possible still to learn from that data without buying into the data in a way that produces lots of suffering?
Yeah. So I don't think there is I mean a simple clear answer to it's a great question. And so like there is of course wisdom in pain, because
Right,
we know that someone who can't sense
right,
physical pain, they're burning themselves, they're cutting
right.
themselves. So of course
Yeah,
it's useful and it's
yeah,
adaptive.
yeah,
I think what we talking about here is the what you could maybe say maladaptive
right,
form of pain. And so uh, so what we studied in our group was something we call pain catastrophizing. So
mm,
a tendency to worry more, to feel, to amplify things. So if you want, that's a kind of the uh, yeah, the capacity to amplify the experience that and in a way that is not helpful.
yes,
Mm.
And for that, so what we found in this study, that so we did two things. So we develop a novel paradigms. When we in the scanner, we measure um, the sensory response to pain, and how much pain bothers the person, the unpleasantness of pain. If you want, the first one is really about the intensity, like the volume of pain, and the other one is how much it's bothering you.
yes.
And so but then we manipulate. We have two different type of manipulation. One, we manipulate the state. So one case it was this open awareness, like open form of mindfulness, and the other one was this sense of getting away from pain, and by counting number.
Right.
So that the task is, you see
Right. So
sometimes in
distracting,
Netflix,
so distracting yourself. So a sort of distraction strategy and a mindful strategy.
exactly. So that was what first one thought is, okay, is it useful to get away from pain by not thinking about pain,
Yeah.
or what is it more less unpleasant if you just totally welcome the pain, you're open to
Right.
it, and you just
Right.
face it?
Right. You're getting out of
So
it by getting into it.
yeah, yeah. And so what we found about that, of course, both novices and experts, meditators, you found that this the strategy to just open up to pain and monitoring it without trying to block it or avoid it is perceived as being less unpleasant compared to the avoidant one. And the second interesting manipulation was to have in the scanner we had either a short painful stimulus or a very long one, which lasts for almost like 16 seconds. So we use a form of thermal pain. So you get this
Yeah,
really
these
like,
these really hurt. I've had this before, and they
oh yeah,
really hurt. It's not
yeah,
a
yeah,
joke.
yeah,
I mean, it gives
exactly.
no damage, but it really
Yeah, yeah,
it is a painful sensation.
it is. And so what the our motivation to have this very long one was to somehow see what when you are informed that you're gonna that you after a couple of seconds you're informed that it's gonna be a short one, it's gonna stop soon, or it's gonna be a very long one and you need to wait 10 more seconds. Does it make a difference in the way you are relating to pain with that sense of, oh no, if you start to project yourself, oh no, 10 more seconds, I'm fed up. So you
Yeah,
start to time travel,
yeah,
to
yeah,
to have resistance, it's creating a space to have thoughts,
yeah.
rumination, and that's and so what we found, look, is whether people who have a tendency to catastrophize, whether they will be less good at regulating the long one compared to the short one. And indeed, what we found is that's the difference between the their what we call regulation of the unpleasantness compared to. I mean, we found that it was the more you have a tendency to catastrophize, the more you were unable to decouple the sensory and the affective
Right.
response in the long
As
one.
soon as it was prolonged. Well, I have to
Exactly.
I have to start by saying I just love neuroscience. I mean, how cool is this? We get to take people and put them in a scanner and then put pain sensors on them and see what the brain does. I mean, it's just an amazing what a funny thing to do. It's great. Have you got a chance to do the same for expert meditators as well? Do you have a study where you put experts in the same sort of situation, prolonged pain, to see
Yeah,
whether
yeah.
they
So
can
so
decouple?
exactly. So what we found with experts that they are indeed better at they were really better at down regulating, in particular the long one, and they're much less prone to they have less pain catastrophizing. They are less bothered by long one compared to the short one. Um, and when we did a qualitative study with experts, we tried to uh, explore with them that was a work from a qualitative researcher, Stefano Poletti, in our group, and he's specialized in qualitative data. So he asks the participant for maybe half an hour open question about how they deal with pain, what is the strategy, and then for like almost 2 years he look at this 30 minutes interview and try to extract like different clusters about the strategy and so on. And what he found is that there are actually 5 types of strategy to deal with pain.
Okay.
And with the very most advanced practitioner, they have a really different way to just engage with pain. Um, and if I need to summarize some of the core findings, that while novices have different strategy, like either avoidance, either making narrative like warrior narrative, like
Yeah.
I can
I'm strong enough. I can stand this.
I can exactly, or some people have already some kind of reappraisal, say, well, this information is just
It is just data. It's just data being
exactly, it's
experienced.
just that.
Yeah.
And then you have a transition to another style, which is much more about a shift from interpreting things in a physical way to interpreting it more as a mental effect. So that
Right.
there is an engagement about, which is a form of deification or cognitive diffusion. So they see it as an opportunity to understand the mind and how the mind
Right.
works,
Right.
and they relate to that much more at the phenomenological level than as a um, by focusing on the physical aspect of things.
Yeah, wow. Just one thing. So I was in Nepal on a longer retreat with Vivekananda. Um,
Okay.
and I remember I went one day for my meditation interview and I said, I've been having migraines because sometimes I get migraines. And I said, yesterday we were talking about non attachment to sensory stimuli, to be equanimous towards sensory stimuli. But I have to tell you, I'm getting really curious about my migraine. So now I'm looking forward to the little migraine burst because it's so fascinating to look at like what is pain and what is my reaction to pain and what's my relationship to pain. And I just wanted to check in. Am I making a mistake here? Should I be more equanimous? And he said, no, no, no. He goes, when you start to be curious about what pain and suffering is all about and your relationship to it and the way your mind responds to it, then there's very little anybody will need to teach you. That once you get to there, the
Yeah.
pain and the suffering sort of teaches you all by itself if you can get curious, if you can get curious about the signal.
Yeah.
The
Yeah. Exactly.
subtlety is though you have to be genuinely curious rather than I'm going to be
Yeah.
curious and therefore I'm not going to be in pain.
Yeah. You're
Yeah.
curious
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's the thing to
Yeah.
do with the course. It wasn't that. It was like
You're
an
right. Yeah.
honest
Yeah.
curiosity. Exactly.
You're right,
I
Jamie. I mean, you can't arrive with what is interesting with pain. You can't arrive with too much hope that the same trick is going. I mean, you need to be totally honest with it, and that's
Yes.
really challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm thinking I'm having a wisdom tooth taken out soon, and
Oh,
that's a painful exercise. And I'm thinking, awesome, let me use these techniques so it doesn't hurt. But that's not curiosity. That's just
no.
another strategy to mitigate against the
Yeah,
pain. So
right.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah, and yeah, the beauty of it that sometimes it might work one time, and then the next session you feel like totally confident it's gonna work again, and then you arrive with all you hope, and it become very unpleasant, and that's again a very nice illustration about this the, the fact that we are co-constructing this. I mean, we're constructing this experience of pain in some degree.
yeah,
Uh,
because it's dynamic to your expectations. You go,
yeah,
brilliant. The mindfulness, the de-reification worked. That didn't
yeah,
really hurt. Okay, now you walk in, and your expectations for actual adjusted suffering are much lower. Whereas the way you got it to be lower in experiential terms was by actually engaging with it. Yeah, it's a subtle game. You have to actually be curious, I think.
yeah. But and when it's happened, it's actually to be curious. First, also phenomenologically, it seems start to be the valence is changed because it, if it's curious, if you are curious, something is interesting, and if it's interesting, it is somehow positive. So
Mm.
Right.
somehow by
Right.
curiosity, you're just changing the valence in itself.
Yeah. You're getting a higher order positive valence over a lower order negative valence,
Yeah,
right? Suddenly
yeah,
it's kind of cool to hang out with your migraine. So you're getting a reward signal now when you're getting the punishing signal of the migraine. You're right. Interesting.
You know what I'm thinking? I can't help but feel is I've never had the experience of having PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but this is kind of the underlying mechanics of why that must be such a traumatic thing. Because your brain is literally, as far as it's concerned, if you're not tooled up in the right ways, playing out the traumatic thing. So the trauma doesn't happen once; it happens as many times as it happens.
No, exactly. That's another domain that you could. It's again the same mechanism, I think, which is applied,
Mm.
um, and in the same mechanism that ultimately you want to be able to first be aware of your emotions during PTSD, and then to be able to relate to the emotion as just an emotion, and it requires a lot of practice, and again that's easy to say on a on a public
Mm.
podcast and say as if it's easy, but I think in practice it requires a lot of training and
Of
in
course.
simple challenge, and gradually you can do it for on more difficult challenges.
Yeah, it's like lifting weights, you'd imagine. You know, in the first instance, you have the picture of the burger,
Mm-mm.
and level 25 is processing something legitimately traumatic.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, just to change it up, you were obviously a PhD student of Francisco Varela,
Uh-huh.
who my understanding is that he kind of thought if you want to study the mind, you need to kind of be acquainted with your own mind, and scientists had to have this view from within.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Do you think your research would have missed something if you didn't have the inside view, if you weren't a meditator?
That's a great question. I have a good friend of mine who, that I really appreciate and value, and and we did some research together. And for her, it's very important not to meditate when you study meditation.
Mm,
Wow.
And that, no, and so now she just got another big grant to study meditation. And so I see her point, and I think it's I mean, I could understand a viewpoint, because I think the rationale is not to be biased, but
Right.
for me, it seems very difficult to just to understand the to have the right hypothesis. It's like if you it's like if you go to a restaurant and you so you want if you want to study food, for instance, and you all you can know is that what people are telling you about the food and telling you about craving and telling you about salivation, but you never like salivate for
Yeah.
a French. I mean, you never taste a French baguette. So what a French croissant? So what do you mean to it's
Yeah.
harder. So I really think it's the first person dimension is central, and I think it's something that needs to be, at least in my view, that's important to cultivate that's intimacy with our one mind. With having said that, I also think there is some limitation in the sense that the risk in that case is to take your own insight as the uh, yeah the only the potentially the truth. And so it's important to have this almost a triangulation with either other researcher, or you need to develop a certain strategy to be able to intersubjectively try to gather enough uh, yeah
phenomenology.
yeah intersubjective validity, cross validity about
Mm.
your
Yeah.
experience, to be
Yeah.
to see whether that it potentially makes sense as a process, that you have a chance to have tap into something like it's experientially meaningful, and scientifically meaningful also. So
It,
you need it's a real field of research in itself, I think.
yeah, it's so mucky though, right? Because even defining the language, the linguistics around
Yeah,
what different experiences mean, and then trying to track its phenomenology, it's why you need lots of you. It's why you need lots of you to
Yeah.
then cross-reference
Exactly.
the.
yeah. And so it's but that is the thing. Either you say, well, it's murky, and then it's better not to be, like the
Yeah, yeah,
behaviorists say, well, it's too murky, we can only trust behavior. But then you end up into, and then the behavior is so limited that you're missing like fundamental aspect of the mind that
Yeah.
are phenomenological by nature. So in particularly meditation, for instance, that sense of clarity, sense of spaciousness that which are related to that sense of deification, or that I discussed before. I found it hard to uh, to operationalize without asking a person. Like,
mm.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
The interesting thing is like I see why people are afraid of the scientists are afraid of the anecdotal thing entering the room. Because if you go have a meditation experience that's strongly one way or the other, I understand your friend's concern going, well, that's going to shift my lens, my biases. I get it. Yeah.
one of them is, I mean, there's different I think obstacle. I mean, one of them is that that sometimes people are so passionate about meditation, like in scientists, that they really want to prove it works. And
Yes.
well, I mean, as a scientist, there is so many times, we find like a negative finding, and we actually we're finishing some very very large study, and sometimes you have a negative finding after years of work, and that's what it is. and,
Yeah.
and, and I understand the concern that you will have a bias. But now here's the interesting finding. Like, I think that there's something that has not been studied, and I would love that someone maybe who's listening to this podcast would want to study, is that
Yeah. Let's hear it.
no, but the issue that about bias, I think I think one of the tension now in academia is that there is so much pressure to publish, for instance, and we
Mhm.
know that there is large evidence that there is uh, publication bias. There is the issue of being able to trust, like there is many form of bias, an error, or like p hacking and so on that you can find in science, which are probably making the field much more murky. And
Yeah.
I suspect that if you're really a true media practitioner, I think you may be more fine with letting go of your expectation,
Yeah. Yeah.
because and so in that sense,
Yeah.
you maybe have some bias, but you may regulate more of the bias, and so
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing to see whether you yeah, whether that would actually be making you more rigorous, because
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
able to be less attached to be to a negative finding.
It's so
Or,
funny. I mean, out of all the things that you can be passionate about and then do science over, meditation might be one of the good ones because it comes with an attempt to try to be non judgmental, to try to see what's real, to try to
yeah,
give up your expectations about how the experiment goes. So you can almost imagine a kind of meditative training program for researchers so that they can learn to let go of
yeah,
their research outcomes a little bit more.
I think so, and that there
Yeah.
is a. I think for Francisco there was really something that is not just about research, but also about ethics,
Right.
like being engaged with giving meaning to what we're doing and
Right.
why we're doing
Right.
it,
Right.
and so I think the practice is a yeah, could be also influence the way we do science, the way we relate to the colleagues, the way so there's a whole another aspect of that field of research that's
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much it has been studied, but that would be
Right.
interesting to see
Yeah.
almost the sociology around that.
Yeah.
Let's get into the woo stuff. Let's talk about the self. Because we've done pain, we've done craving. We're just building up to the self really. Like is the concept it's like the un, fundamental. We all walk around with a sense we're kind of behind our eyes. That's the self. There's certain assumptions wrapped up in there. Can that be deified in the same way that pain might be able to be, or cravings might be able to be?
Well, I mean, in the some of the practitioners who came to the lab in doing this particular task, they were doing a form of meditation that you can call non-dual mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
So it's come from the Dzogchen Mahamudra tradition, when the focus is not so much on the content, so but also on the perceiver himself. So I'm not sure whether you can talk about deification, because reification, that's come from the Latin res, the thing. So it's about the thingness of things. So um, when you use this practice, so is a subject. So the subject is not a thing. It's a subject. But you're right in the sense that I agree with you in the sense that it comes with a certain quality of being permanent and solid. And so this style of practice, they really try to deconstruct that particular sense of solidity. Uh, um,
For,
and I think um, that's probably account for some of the finding we have, that they are better at being less bothered by the pain, because in a way there is um, less someone to be protecting, or less they more capacity to understand the nature of emotion, and nature of the perceiver with what having an emotion.
Right.
But that's but at that stage we have not yet find a good way to really operationalize that style of practice.
yeah, because as you say, that could be the fundamental one of the underlying consistent drivers of the results, right? It might just be people who are experienced meditators.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Well, so that's the thing. In our work, it's really a very complicated issue, because you if you want, in our framework, we distinguish between a form of what we call open monitoring
Hmm.
and a form called open presence. And the distinction was suggested by a colleague, John Dunn, who is a specialist in Buddhism, and that comes from the distinction between a capacity to, if you want, suspend or let go of any of the sense of the reification of every any type of appearance. So we talk about perception, emotion, and thoughts. That would be open monitoring. But then there is a much more like deeper understanding of the nature of the agent, of the perceiver himself, of that of the content of the mind, and that style of this form of more advanced form of letting go is we call open presence. And in our work, we 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 work with expert practitioners who claim that they have this capacity to suspend that kind of subject-object duality, but they also told us that it's not something that you can necessarily do at demand. It's that you can cultivate the practice, but it may arise or may not arise. So scientifically, it's very hard to operationalize the distinction between open monitoring and open presence. So
Right.
in our study, we say, well, we're working with people who might be doing that, but we don't know if it's open presence or open monitoring, and we still don't know. And so it's a fundamental question. It's very hard, I think, scientifically, because the reason it's hard is because it's ultimately really about the subjectivity of consciousness, and we don't know yet very well how to operationalize that. Why? Because science is about object, and so that's really where is the tension and why it's so hard scientifically.
Is that one reason why it might be good to get advanced meditators into the lab to be participants, because they may be able to better comment? I mean, really, like lifelong career style meditators,
Yeah, yeah.
sort of
So that
monastics,
exactly.
would be able
So
to
we
say what state they were doing and what practice they were doing in a very refined and very detailed way.
Yeah, in principle, yes. In practice, it's very again, it's very hard to. We need to rely on the tradition to be sure to know exactly who is a good
Right.
practitioner. It's
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, of course. Time in doesn't necessarily mean you're a good practitioner in a
no,
way. Right.
Also, it's a scientific nightmare because if this stuff is intermittent, you could be a great practitioner, but if it's not online, it's not online, and you rocked up to the lab, and
yeah.
now yeah, Jesus, I mean, like that's a headache.
One time we had I think it's not confidential to say that, but it's at some point we flew an expert practitioner from abroad when I was with Richard Davidson in Madison, and so the guy arrived, the person arrived, and so we put him in the scanner, and then in the scanner he'd never been in the scanner, and it's very narrow. And suddenly he had a panic attack because he had some personal history with closed space,
Oh,
and just at he had this. He's a great practitioner, but then it's triggered this panic attack, and he was
yes.
what it is, and so and I'm sure it's going to interfere with his capacity to.
Yes,
It's
of
it
course.
was a challenge for him at that time
Of
and that
course.
moment, and so when you are in retreat, it's one thing. When you are arrive in a new environment after,
Yeah. In an fMRI machine.
yeah,
Then let's be shipping out these fMRIs to retreats. Like
yeah,
Yeah,
it
exactly.
might disrupt the 3 months of silence, but it would actually be interesting to look at people practitioners in their purest form, peak form of practice, which is probably in the middle of a retreat, right?
yeah, exactly. And that's actually one of my PhD students, like um, Arnaud Poublan-Cozardo. That was his idea. So because we recently, we spend a lot of effort and a lot of financial resources in the field to study MBSR. And I think MBSR play a critical role in studying the field of research. But in terms of its limitation, it's not very intense. And so, and I think really one of the central questions to do exactly what you proposed, Jamie, is to go on retreat and to do that during intensive retreat.
Right.
And so one thing we've done this time is to do after a 10-day intensive retreat to try to
Mm.
get at the peak of that in retreat but ideally you want to follow someone doing a 3-year retreat.
Yeah.
But that's another you know for a PhD student, that would be
Yeah.
an impossible project.
It's kind of gets to the heart of the science. Like, as humans, we're just interested in where the edge is, right? That's why we have the Olympics. That's why we take the extreme cases and then monitor and try and work out what the variables are. And it's kind of an exciting idea, like taking practitioners who are at their peak
Yeah,
of
yeah,
whatever the relevant thing is. But
yes and no. I mean, in the sense that, yeah, no, I'm sure it will be a great contrast and very, very useful. Having said that, I think at the end, a very advanced practitioner, when you come bring it to the lab, he should be able uh, to be in that state at that moment.
yeah, and while it's
And,
interesting,
and that, for instance, this practitioner, who had a panic attack, within a couple of minutes, he was able to recover. And I mean, it was a very serious panic attack. And then, he had a couple of, he had like 10, 15 minutes of meditation, and then he was ready to go, and he went fine. So you need to be able to, yeah, in principle, that there are, that's another scientific question, the distinction between a state
hmm,
and which really what we do in science. We're looking at states, and then there is these very advanced states like non-dual states, which are supposed to be um, right that should the manifestation should be almost like independent of the states of the content. So you almost have this another paradox for a scientist. What does it mean? So all that to say, there is a lot of interesting question we still need to
Yeah,
understand.
yeah,
to bring it back down to earth from non-dual states for a second, we've got like you've been doing this for a number of years, both kind of from the inside in terms of meditation, but also the research. What's the single practical this afternoon thing that people can do to start improving their lives using kind of the research,
Using the
or using the mechanics that are revealed by the research, using the nature of the human brain?
well, it's an interest. I find it a difficult question, actually, in the sense that the is about the status of the scientific knowledge uh, for meditation. Um, and so say differently, what is the added value of scientific knowledge that was not there in for a practitioner? Uh, and and um, and that, I think in that sense that's a difficult question.
Mm.
Uh, what we can say that there is, um, that when you measure the brain of someone who have been trained them for a long time, they have, you can see changes in the brain function, and in the brain anatomy, and so that there is an impact of this practice on the brain, and on different mental functions. So in that sense, that's an inspiration for for to at least an inspiration to that it may be meaningful. Now, if you want to look for an insight of I think for me the most interesting insight is that we we spend a lot of our this notion of deification. I think, like,
yeah,
we spend a lot of time outside, engaged in the world, and what all of this data is pointed out is to say that a lot of this, that what we are running after and what we are engaging is somehow also constructed by our our mind, and
yes,
so if you're not aware of your mental projection, it's well, it make you suffer a little bit more. And
yeah,
so that's an invitation to maybe turn the gaze a little bit more inside, and so in that sense, to create this sense of curiosity that you discussed before, to be curious about our own experience. Maybe I hope that could be something that could come from the type of work we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like the low hanging fruit here, so to speak, is just by starting to go, okay, this thought might not be real.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Even that space that's generated from saying, is it real? Is this the only way to see this thing? Is it the only way to interpret this bit of data?
You know what it reminds me of is when babies fall over, they often don't cry, but then they look around, and if you react, they start crying because
oh,
they kind of go, "Oh my god, a big scary thing has just happened. Let's." But if you just go, "Come on, up you get," they kind of go, they interpret the same data, and go, "Oh, that's totally fine." Whereas if you make a big song and dance, they interpret the data as that was a massive disaster.
hmm.
It's a little bit like that, right? We just need to maybe all be spending a little bit more time going, "This is a thought. Let's not catastrophize." Up we get.
Yeah, it's I think it's in a more an interest for yeah, where do we put our interest, and I think putting a little bit more interest about where about our own mind might not be a bad idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like that. I like that very understated way of putting
Yeah.
it. Having
That's
spent 20
that
years
should
meditating
that
and
should be
researching it.
I want a t-shirt that says that, being a little more interested in your mind might be a decent thing to do.
But
Very
in
good.
practice, it's not what we do. I mean, we're always running after email about to dos, about
Yes.
you know.
Yeah. 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 Great.
Antoine, thanks, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Thank
I
you so
mean,
much.
nice to meet you. I hope it was, yeah, it was really fun to see you. And